This podcast series is supported by members at Patreon. If you want to support this podcast series, head to patreon.com/Cascadian beer. What do you do when you can't find the beer you're looking for? You make it yourself. Welcome to the Cascadian Beer Podcast. My name is Aaron and I'm a Cascadian. I have a background in radio and television broadcasting. I'm a music producer and have a passion for beer. I don't consider myself to be an expert in beer by any means, but I do enjoy and respect the craft and the passion of these brewmasters. I want to learn from these pioneers on what sets them apart from the rest and why they choose to call Cascadia their home. Cascadia is a bioregion in the Pacific Northwest on the North American continent. It is made up of the U.S. states of Washington and Oregon, as well as the Canadian province of British Columbia. In this podcast series, I'll be profiling the unique breweries of Cascadia, a region that has a strong presence on the international beer scene. Today I'm sitting down with Adam Chatburn, the owner of Real Cask in Vancouver, BC. Adam focuses on the traditional styles of British ales and cask ales. I started by asking him what the idea was behind starting his brewery.
So my idea was that I wanted to bring British-style cask ales to BC. The problem is that there was a lot of people trying to do sort of British styles, ESBs, that kind of thing. But I was finding that they were making the final mistake of putting them into kegs and serving them overcarbed and too cold. And as the craft beer revolution moved on and picked up pace, I was waiting for someone to really get in there and do it well so I could go there and drink. However, no one seemed to be doing it the way I thought it should be done. So I decided to put my money where my mouth was, and I organized with Chris and Dinah here at Callister to come on as one of the associate brewers and actually do it the way that I was taught many, many years ago when I was first a brewer in the UK.
So for the listener that might not have had an actual traditional British-style ale, what is the immediate difference that the drinker would recognize?
Well, the thing I always try and make clear to people is there's a difference between cask beer and real ale. Now, a cask beer is slightly different from a keg in that it's just a stoppered with some plastic seals, but they don't have any additional CO2 added. All the carbon dioxide is created by the yeast inside. Now, when you put in things in a cask, some brewers put it in directly from a keg, some people put it in from a bright tank, some people then throw in crazy things, chili, jackfruit, God only knows what. And that's fine, you know, that's really creative. There's some wonderful stuff been done. There's some great ideas and some fantastic beers been done that way. But that's very different from the real ale principle, which is do it to style, keep it simple, don't make anything silly, serve it the right way, i.e. from the cask through a beer engine, and then you'll have a much more traditional British-style beer.
So sticking like proper to the definition of that particular style, right?
I try to for a couple of my beers. I try to keep that tight sort of CAMRA UK style of beer. Done the right way, still-aged, no CO2 added, just served properly. And I think there's more than enough expats here in Vancouver and around the province and people who visited the UK and enjoyed it there who seem to think that it seems to be pretty legit. So I'm quite lucky with that one. But also the model allows me to have some fun with casks as well. I like to play around with doing sours, much lighter sours, more balanced kind of things, and gruits, all kinds of fun things that allow me to kind of flex my muscles a little bit more. But as long as I keep the bitter and the mild in the taps, most of the customers are pretty happy.
Right. And your taps are completely different than a normal tap that somebody would see.
That's true. Most beer taps are pushed through the kegs with CO2. And so the tap, when you open it, is already pressure behind it. And then opening it just allows the beer to come out. Whereas the engines that I use, and you can see these online working very well, the ones that you used to see on Coronation Street and those kind of shows, those northern British kind of shows in the pub, that are the big wooden posts. And those actually work in a different principle. They have a small piston in the back. And by pumping it, you're actually drawing the liquid up from a lower level. So there's nothing pushing it. You have to pull the beer through. It's a slightly different process. What we also do is we have these small shower heads that we put on the end of each of the taps, the cask taps, and those create, they push the beer through these small holes, and that creates a cascade of bubbles similar to you'd see in a Guinness or a Nitro beer, and that gives it that creamy texture and that tight head as well. So those are kind of more common in the north of England rather than the south, but that's what I like on my beers. And I don't use it for all the beers, like for sours and things like that. It doesn't make much sense to make them a creamy sour, but if it works, it works. Again, depends on the style in the beer that I'm serving and my whim that day if it's going to go through a sparkler or not.
So originally from the UK, what got you into beer?
Well, I first found out that one was able to homebrew when I was about 15. I realized that I could make this at home for pennies. I remember being 15 and being given some money for the summer, and I bought a carboy and a fermentation bucket and a pressure barrel, which we don't really have here that much. They're kind of like a Gatorade tub that can be pressurized with a little faucet on the front. I bought those. I think they were about £5 each or something, and then went to the pharmacist, which was the place you could buy the little brew kits. And then I decided to start making my own beer, which meant that I was automatically invited to teenage parties right through high school, as it were, because they knew I'd turn up with 40 litres of usually fairly unimpressive, very infected bitter, but it was free and it had alcohol in it, which is pretty much all people were after at that point. And so it was kind of a fun system, and Nathan didn't get drunk, came home with me, and I finished it off myself. So that's what really got me into it. I homebrewed right through university because, again, money's tight and you can make it yourself for a lower price. And then when I finished university, I actually, through sheer luck, wound up working in a brewery in my hometown. And because I had a bit of aptitude and had a bit of experience, I quickly became the head brewer there. It's not a big position. There's only 3 people there, so it wasn't, a big deal.
Looks good on a resume.
Well, it was rather. Yeah. But again, I was thrown to the dogs again there. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was shown once how to use the equipment, and then was like, okay, you're in charge now. Off you go. But so this kind of teaching myself basic engineering and all this kind of stuff. The interesting thing is that this was back in '99, so the internet was very nascent at the time, so you couldn't just kind of Google for recipes and clues and stuff. You had to actually go to the library and order a book to be able to get some information about it. So I did that for about 2 years, and then the brewery folded, unfortunately, because it was part of a bigger brew pub and hotel group that failed. So I was kind of never really thought I'd have the chance to do the job again. And so started working for British government, and then moved to Canada in 2008 and started working for the Canadian government. Started volunteering in craft beer stuff, as one does. Had a great time doing that. And then found myself president of CAMRA Vancouver, which was a great organization to be a part of.
And what is that organization for our listeners?
So CAMRA Vancouver, CAMRA BC is a craft beer advocacy group. It's the only craft beer consumer advocacy group in BC. It's dedicated to helping the consumers to know about craft beer, learn about it, find out where it is, to try it, and really enjoy it. So it's got a very heavy education mandate. It has a very strong event program, a lot of education classes, and it also argues with the liquor board and the BC government over drinkers' rights, because quite a lot of the time we get overlooked. The actual person who's paying the tax at the end of the day gets overlooked, and they really should have someone stepping up for them, because there's a lot of things, industry, and mean that the consumers are getting a little bit of the thin end of the wedge. They're getting ripped off, they're getting shortchanged on a few things, and there's no one really stepping up for them. The liquor board isn't interested, the licensing people aren't interested, the police aren't interested. So there's a lot of little things like that. So it was a wonderful time to be a part of it just during the liquor review, and hopefully we managed to push a few things through that we were very much in favor of. Things like bringing in happy hour finally, when that came in about 3 years ago, which seems completely normal now, but was a huge change at the time, and a few other bits and pieces. So CAMRA tries to stay focused on the consumer end. I would still be organized. I still teach classes for them periodically, and I'm always happy to volunteer my time. Unfortunately, I can't run for the executive, because in order to maintain that independence, we agreed that people involved in the craft beer industry at a management or ownership level shouldn't be on the executives, just to keep that separation of industry and consumerism, which I fully support. It was actually my suggestion to bring it in. But as soon as I don't, I would very much be involved with CAMRA again. So CAMRA does stand for the Campaign for Real Ale of BC. It was actually based on the British organisation CAMRA UK, which is the biggest single issue consumer group in the world. There's over nearly 300,000 members of that in the UK. It's a very strong group. But other than the name and an agenda to share and educate people, we don't really share that much. I still say we, even though I'm only a member these days. But yeah, they are very focused on their mission, and we're very focused on our mission, which, because we're in two totally different countries, are going to be different issues that we have to chase.
And completely different liquor laws as well. And
different liquor laws, different problems, different issues that are coming up. CAMRA UK was really put there to kind of maintain those real ales and the history of that, so that they didn't die out from commercial pressure. And they've done a fantastic job of that. But now, this craft beer revolution is happening around the world, and they're finding themselves in a very difficult position, because they were always straight up, keg beer is no good. Like, all keg beer is bad. And that's clearly not the case, as well we know. So it's that idea of moving away from real ale into craft beer. It's kind of an interesting time there, that's for sure.
Aside from not being able to get it yourself, was there any other drive behind you opening your own real ale brewery?
Well, a big chunk of it, as I say, was that I wanted something that I would be able to drink and enjoy. I also think I'd probably talked quite a big game about it for a while, and that kind of thing with CAMRA and so forth. So I kind of wanted to put my money where my mouth was and say, look, no, I do have the chops to actually do this. The other thing about it was I knew that it was a very small niche, and it would not work in a lot of different environments. So, people still ask, like, oh, you're going to open up your own brewery? And I'm like, and I don't know. Like, I'm not doing what I want to do. It's not enough of a niche to be able to make that work in Vancouver, even though this is the biggest market.
But also a lot of pubs aren't even equipped to serve your beer.
That's right. So it's very difficult to find those kind of draft accounts, and then packaged product would be even harder. So in order to maintain the level that I want to do, the Callister model is perfect for me. We're just about to announce that we'll be here for a third year. So they will be the only group that's been here at Callister this whole time since we opened. It's actually interesting because when I was with CAMRA, I first met Chris and Diana, again, through Van Brewers, the local homebrew group, which is another fantastic organization. And they were looking to start a community brewery. And we actually had this huge meeting in downtown East Side about 5 years ago now to come up with an idea of how to start some kind of community brewery. And there's a lot of different people with a lot of ideas, some stuff which was wildly impractical. But I brought my idea forward, and Chris and Dinah brought their idea forward, and I chatted them about it. And as soon as they started talking, I was like, oh, yes, these guys are way further along. They've got a much better, much stronger idea, and it fell within a budget that I was kind of hoping for, like within what I was aiming for. And so, yeah, I was the first person to sign on long before even the building was found. I was already agreed to be a part of it. As the facility got built and everything became along, I got more and more involved. And then, and so now I've been here, going to be 3 years, showing new people how to use the equipment, how to pour a beer, and that kind of stuff. So even though my emphasis from CAMRA has changed, it's still a very strong educational and craft beer focused kind of organization.
So what is Callister Brewing? Like, what is the mandate of this building that we're in?
Well, Chris and Diana built the brewery themselves. It's the smallest brewery in Vancouver. We have a very small brew house in capacity. Vast majority of what we make is sold through the tasting room. We just don't have the capacity to do more at this stage. But the idea is that they would start it, and then they would bring on 3 additional associate brewers for 1 year, and then they would pay a subscription. And then basically when the beer was sold, we would just split it 50-50 with Callister, is broadly the idea of how it worked. And on the whole, it works really, really well. We've had a couple of great brewers come through already. They've gone on to bigger and better things. Brewery Creek and Machine were here the first year. Machine became Superflux and are now dominating the hazy IPA market here in Vancouver with some fantastic beers. But they've been doing those hazy IPAs for 2 years now. Like, they started out doing those a long time ago here, and now everyone else is kind of catching up. So this is one of the nice things about Callister, is that you do get this huge amount of innovation. Because it's such a smaller thing and there isn't that same commercial pressure, you're allowed to kind of play around with a few things and try a few new things. Maybe they work, maybe they don't. But it's a big learning curve, and you're able to kind of come up with some new things.
On some professional equipment that you would actually have to put up a lot of capital for.
Exactly.
Right?
Like the vast, some people are, home brewers or whatever, and people say to them, oh, this beer is fantastic, you should make it. And some people should. But again, it's difficult to take everything you have, your career, your lives, your mortgage and everything, throw it in the air and then try and start a business that you may not have any aptitude for, may not actually have any knowledge of, or, that might not work out. So being able to do this is a very cost-effective way of getting in there and trying it out. If you then find a brand or find a market that is a nice niche, or you find someone with a whole bunch of money that wants to put some money behind you, then you can move on to bigger and better things. Lightheart and Boombox, who are just finishing up here at Callister, moving on to much bigger and better things, and good luck to them. They're fantastic people, and no one would have known about it if they hadn't had this opportunity here. And that was one of the reasons why I wasn't sure if I was going to be staying around at Callister for a second and now third year, because I don't want to be here if it means that I'm stopping someone like Boombox or Lightheart from taking a spot. But if there was no one else who wants to take the cask spots, then I'll take them, because I still like them.
Do you have any ambition then to grow if that time came?
I like to play around with a few different ideas. We've started packaging a few of our beers. Our best bitter, which is our main sort of flagship beer, as it were, is now available in cans, but only here in the tasting room. In terms of expansion, I don't really think there's that much more that that I could do. I want to build a few more recipes. I've actually done most of the beers that I really wanted to make, but now I can kind of go back and have another bash and try and dial them in a bit. And I've still got a few ideas in the tank of crazy stuff that missed the cut the first 2 years, but it's a really fun way of doing it, and being able to be involved in all stages, I think, is really interesting, because so many breweries are so much demarcation in the roles that here I do everything from sourcing the ingredients, designing the recipes, brewing it myself, packaging it, and actually selling it in the tasting room, because one of the conditions of the contract is that we have to spend a day in the tasting room each week, which I thoroughly enjoy. I actually do extra shifts periodically because I enjoy it so much, where I get to meet the customers, get to talk to them about it, get the feedback from them, see what they think. And also it's fun for the customers to actually meet the brewer and chat to them about it as well. So yeah, in the same way here at Callister, the brew house is completely visible from the tasting room and the washrooms and so forth, so that there isn't that same separation between what goes on behind closed doors and what you get given to drink. We want to reduce that separation as much as possible so that people are aware of it, and then they can be excited about it if they choose to be. They don't have to be, but if they are and they're interested, then we can be a part of it. And we've also tried to stay in the heart of the community as well, insofar as, maintaining our relationship with Van Brewers and allowing them to come and do collaborations here and that kind of stuff. Just key being part of the community. That's really what a huge chunk of it is.
The system here, how big is the system here? And is there any different process to you making your beer than there would be, say, somebody making like a regular IPA that they can get anywhere else, or a regular ESB? Like, is there a different process in the actual making of a real ale?
The whole brewing process is broadly the same, whether you're doing it in a pot on the stove or you're doing it in a giant brew house. It's broadly the same. There's a few technical bits that can be different, but ostensibly our system, which is a 4-barrel system around a 5 hex or 500 liters, which is tiny compared to the vast majority of the brewers here. Parallel 49 have these 100 and 120 heck tanks, these giant beasts of tanks with tens of thousands of liters in. So ours is obviously much, much smaller than that. The only thing is that at every stage in brewing, you lose a bit of beer, whether it's transferring to the fermenter to bright tanks to containers. You're always losing beer, especially hoppier beers, dry hopping beers. You can really lose a lot of content. Now, if we were doing it, in our tanks, however you do it, you'll probably lose maybe 100 liters or so from it in terms of the yeast and the liquid trub, which if you've got 100 heck is only a 1% loss. But if you've got a 5 heck, then it's a 20% loss. And that 20% loss is very, very expensive. That's a tough pill to take. So certain beers, less hops, less loss. The casks actually are very efficient in that respect, but they do, what they make up on the swings, they lose on the roundabouts, because you still wind up with a lot of lees that are left in the cask at the end of service. So we lose about 3 to 4 liters in each cask every time anyway. So we still lose some, but again, that's part of the process. Aside from that, it's broadly the same. There's only a few smaller differences, but yeah, the 4-barrel 5-hex system is a really fun size, but it's pretty much just a scaled up homebrew system.
So since you opened, have you seen a growth in awareness of real ales? Like, do you feel like there's kind of a trend of people becoming more aware and open to the idea of these traditional ales?
I do seem that it seems to go that way, because unfortunately there's a lot of people who come in and they're like, oh, I tried a cask once, I didn't like it, because they had it at a cask night somewhere where it was a warm, flat, badly looked after cask. And that's kind of a big chunk of what I struggle with, is that I'm trying to show people that the vast majority of the way that they've seen casks done in North America is wrong. It's straight up wrong. Like, every stage of it has been done incorrectly. So putting in finished beer, wrong. Putting it up on the bar and tapping it and serving it right away, wrong. Like, that's just the worst possible way of doing it. Putting it in the fridge, tapping it in advance, allowing the carbonation and conditioning to balance itself out, and then serving it through an engine, keeping it still and cold the whole time, you're going to get a much, much better product. So rather than like a yeasty milkshake of a beer glass that we've had sometimes from some casks. So a big chunk of, as I say, why I wanted to do this was to show people, like, no, these aren't scary. British beer has that reputation for being warm and flat, which is not necessarily unfounded, but it also misses the point a little bit as well. So I think more and more people are trying it. I think a lot of people are finding it because the beers tend to be a lot more balanced than West Coast beers, which tend to be rather unbalanced, in my opinion. They're also lower carbonation or slightly different carbonation, so people don't get quite gassed up the way, which is quite appealing to some people who have intestinal issues or find themselves getting bloated from craft beer quite quickly, especially with it being so highly carbonated and so served so cold in most places. Really can do a number on people with irritable bowel syndrome or who are prone to getting bloated. And it also means that, although this is, by the by, you can drink more of it because, 3 pints of it won't fill you up quite the way that it's done. So, and also, I just like the way that the texture and the taste and the carbonation is different and therefore is interesting to me. So people try it, and a lot of people tend to find that they like it, people who you might not necessarily expect. So things like milds often attract people who, they're like, oh, I don't want anything bitter, I don't want anything strong, and I don't want it. It's like, okay, we'll give you some mild, try that out. So, the milds, that lower alcohol style, little bit malty, tiny bit of hops, super, super easy to drink, very, very accessible. And it's really becoming getting quite a big following these days.
And you've won a couple of awards for your beers as well.
Done some bits and pieces, had some really good feedback on them. I'm just super pleased that people are trying them and liking them. And similarly, there's a few people who've come in and found that this, like, oh, yeah, this is my jam, and they become regulars pretty quickly, and they'll come in and have 4 or 5 pints most days, which is ideal.
So who inspires you locally with the beers that they're making?
I think overall the quality is really magnificent, especially here in Yeast Van, the breweries in the area. I'm actually really liking what Ryan at Lupulo's doing at the moment. I think that he's got such a good brain on his shoulders. Like, again, built the place pretty much himself, had all the right ideas, and he's really getting in there and really working those styles hard. I also like the fact that he's not necessarily coming up with silly names for his beers, which, again, there's a place for it. It's totally fine. But it's that more British style where it's like, name of the brewery, style of beer, that's what we've got. So that whole kind of idea behind it, I really like. And some of the small batch stuff. So Ryan, to a large extent, I'm a big fan of. And, in the year that they've been working, they've been doing really, really great work. I'm very happy with them. Aside from that, there's not one person that I don't think has got the capacity to do some great work here in Vancouver. So,
and if somebody was wanting to open up their own brewery, what would be some advice that you'd give them?
1, don't do it for the money. 2, if you think you can do it in 6 months, you're not going to. It's going to take you at least a year. So whatever your initial plan is to get it done, make sure you double it and make sure you have the money to make sure you can get all the way there. 3, try and make sure you've got good solid styles dialed in that you know you'll be able to package. Above all, don't forget your tasting room. That's people's impression of you, and it's reflecting their view on it. So whilst, some tasting rooms are kind of an afterthought, some places are really getting a lot of effort and money put into them, with restaurants and so forth in there. I think that now that the government is making us put more food in, it's now going to get more into creating these kind of brew pub style venues with restaurant licenses. I think that's the natural way to go, simply because it's a legal requirement, but it also adds a funding stream, which is super important to be able to do that. The other thing as well is I really think it's important that people try and find a niche now, because I think the days of where you try and open a brewery with a lager, a pale ale, an IPA, and a stout are long gone. I think those, unless if you're trying to do it here in the city, like further out in the province, that may well be totally fine still. But I think that people opening with that kind of plan now are really going to struggle, because the consumers are much more savvy now. They've got a lot more complex tastes, and there's a lot more variety for people to try. So unless you're really nailing those styles beautifully, I think you need to try and find a niche that works a bit better for you. Which again, 5-6 years ago, the idea of opening a purely Belgian style brewery in Burnaby would have been insane. However, clearly they've demonstrated that as long as you know what you're doing and you can put out a good product and you're consistent, that's all people will find it and they'll do it. So I'm liking to see more of that kind of specialization and more niche styles, rather than just, a plethora of more over the top, badly done IPAs. Like, let's really see some interesting niche stuff. I'm curious to see it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Big thank you to Adam for his time. It was really great to chat with him, and he makes delicious beer. You got to go down to Callister Brewing and check him out, as well as the others involved. I'll have to do an update episode soon all about Callister. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support it, you can do so by going to Patreon at patreon.com/Cascadian Beer. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cascadian Beer. We're also on Twitter at twitter.com/Cascadian Beer, or just at Cascadian Beer if you're in the Twitter app. If you really like this episode and you like this podcast series, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Many of you have already done so, and thank you so much for your feedback. I really appreciate it. It really motivates me to keep doing this podcast series. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, remember, support your local.